Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you. This is Fatma calling from Tunisia. Let us know your names and where you're dialing in from today. We're eager to have a conversation about workplace trauma and employee well-being, so welcome. We love that you're here. I see Pittsburgh, Texas, San Diego, Florida, New Jersey, Canada, Milwaukee, Texas, Virginia. Do we have international people? Is it just me? North Carolina, London, great, amazing, welcome. Bermuda, yes, welcome all of you. I would love for us to get set up before we start the conversation. You know that we love using the chat and having you included in the conversation, so please don't hesitate to use it. Use it to ask questions, to make comments, to contribute to each other's thoughts and the panelists as well. And also start thinking about why you're here today. Why did you show up? If anyone could jump on the question, how is your organization addressing workplace trauma and employee well-being? Can you maybe drop a few thoughts that we can share with everyone here? Let's maybe leave a few seconds for people to write their thoughts. I'll put in some music. We haven't addressed it formally. We have implemented a few options, looking for ideas. We're starting to talk about it. This is great. I'm so happy to hear that people are starting to talk about this. Not addressed, proactive instead of reactive. This is really good. So before we dive into the conversation, would love to introduce our partners and the hosts of this webinar. So we have 15Five, performance management tool that helps managers grow and develop their teams with weekly check-ins. If you're looking for a tool that facilitates one-on-ones and make tangible impact on employee performance, check them out. And then we have ThinkHuman. ThinkHuman unleashes soul in business by equipping people leaders with the skills they need to lead effectively, compassionately, and inclusively. We do this work through cohort-based leadership journeys focused on increasing emotional intelligence and creating space for a true mindset shift and long-lasting behavioral change. Now a poll is gonna pop up. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And please let us know which company would you like to hear from. I'll leave a few seconds here to have people choose which company they would like to connect with. It could be for partnership, it could be for different types of partnerships as well. We have a lot of companies sometimes reach out for conversations like these that we can do together. Sometimes it's for the services we provide. So please feel free to book a time or choose a partner that you would like to talk to. Oh, we have someone from Italy. This is great. You're 1 hour away. All righty. So now we could dive into the conversation. Hakimia, over to you. Hakimia is our amazing moderator. I will let her lead the conversation from here.
Thank you so much, Fatma. I just want to give a shout out to Molly for helping me think of this. I want to say bonjour, hola, salam to everyone here across the world, wherever you are at. I'm elated to be here, and I'm happy to see that corporate America finally waking up and recognizing the workplace-induced trauma it has caused on so many people, specifically underrepresented groups. I'm happy to see that leaders and organizations have grown more vocal and, quite frankly, are finally starting to give a damn, okay? Workplace-induced trauma can stem from several causes, such as racism, sexism, bullying in the workplace, poor work-life boundaries, and job insecurity. It's not a new concept, but research over the past 2 decades has highlighted its rising prominence, and some workers have come to refer to it as workplace PTSD. The American Institute of Stress reports that about 33% of people report feeling extreme stress within their organization, and 77% of people experience stress that affects physical health. Trauma affects every aspect of our lives, okay? Trauma shows up as in shorter tempers, in poor communication styles, or the inability to concentrate, forgetfulness, high absenteeism, and turnover. In times like this, in times of crisis, we need leaders to support and guide us. When leaders are willing to address challenges with honesty, it models endurance, resilience, and integrity. The military calls it grief leadership, which is the power of a leader in times to inspire a team to use their vulnerability as a strength and come together by expressing their emotions in a healthy and appropriate way. This fosters a healthy workplace environment, for one, which is extremely important, and healing. It also reduces turnover and allows us to truly feel heard and seen and respected in the workplace. So I applaud all of you here today. Yes, you, because you've stepped up and out of your own faith and divine courage to at least learn or to shed light on this issue of workplace trauma. And today, we are doing the work. We're doing the work to be free from workplace trauma, and we're doing the work to know that freeing yourself is one thing, but claiming ownership of that freed self is another thing, and it's even more vital. So I'm happy to be here with you today. And with that being said, I'm excited to introduce you to our gifted leaders in the industry. They have been emboldened to create a new status quo within their respective organizations and beyond. And I adore them so much. Francesca Walker, instructor, design, and facilitator at ThinkHuman. Jessica Simpson, people and culture executive, founder, 10K Collective. Zoe Nicole, product manager in 15.5. And I would love to start the conversation off with just simply this. Starting with Zoe, what's that definition of trauma versus workplace trauma?
Yeah, great question. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I think trauma is definitely that kind of larger picture, higher umbrella term of trauma consists, like you said, of impacts that experiences we have on us, on our body, on our whole being, whether that's from bullying, whether that's from having a caregiver who wasn't, super attentive or always available to our needs, or whether it was more kind of these quote unquote bigger T traumas like sexual assault or different types of harassment. And workplace trauma is kind of the environment that trauma is enacted in, or the origin of that trauma exists within a workplace or an organization. And so kind of a more specified environment of how that trauma comes to be.
Thank you, Zoe. Anyone have anything else to add to that? Well said. So how, have it been with, as it relates to your personal human experience when it comes to trauma? What are some of those stories that you've heard?
I think there's a lot. I think especially of how do we live in a world that, especially with the rise of internet and all these other things where we experience trauma even secondarily. So I watch the news and I see violence being enacted on the news, or I see stories, I read stories of all these other things happen. That does have an impact on our own bodies and our own experiences, in addition to kind of listening to both my own experience of being a transgender person in the world and in the workplace, especially what are those microaggressions and those experiences I have of my gender identity or my pronouns not being respected. And so kind of that lived experience of essentially not feeling safe to be my full authentic self, whether I'm at work or out in the world or in my personal life, of like all of those things start to build up. And I feel like that's a pretty common thing I hear from a lot of people I talk to, is how do I don't feel safe being my full self. at work,
Yeah.
especially. And if I do become vulnerable and start sharing some of my experiences, how is that going to be used against me somehow? How am I then going to be pushed out of my job, out of my company, out of my career? And then what is the ongoing impact that's going to have on who I am as a person?
You know, when I just heard you say that, what came to mind was being true to myself in the workplace could be harmful to me. And that's hard to live through every day. And it's just not true, but it's just the work culture that you live in that makes it true. So thank you so much, though, for sharing. And I know, Jessica and Francesca, please unmute yourselves. I know you have some interesting stories as well.
Yeah, I mean, interesting is one way to put it for sure. But, this piece about authenticity, particularly, for myself as a Black woman, I mean, existing in the world as a Black woman is a feat in and of itself. And then kind of walking into the workplace and having to deal with what that means inside those four walls is really just kind of compounds the impact. And so, I know for me, in terms of like showing up authentically, right? I mean, for me, that has been deemed as a problem, right? I actually had a place of employment that in my performance evaluation put that I was problematic. Because I was always, quote unquote, looking for problems, right? And so it's very interesting, right? Particularly when we think about a lot of companies who say that they're on a journey of inclusivity, of justice, of anti-racism, my favorite. But we don't really get to see that in practice, right? And so, I know that for me, one of the things that, as someone who has like big T traumas, like in their personal life, but also is coming into this workspace that is not only triggering those traumas, but is also creating new traumas inside of this environment. I think it's important to kind of name that. And I think one thing that that has been really salient for me, and I'm seeing this in retrospect, I didn't realize it in the moment, but the same kind of ways that my body reacts, right? When I'm thinking about like my personal traumas, it's the same way that my body is reacting when we're thinking about traumas that are being reproduced and produced in the workplace. And so this kind of compartmentalizing, this kind of stepping outside of myself, this emotional numbing, all of these things that I need to do to survive in these companies. And that's also what is reinforced. That's what is, that's who gets promoted, right? And so, I think I really had to think a lot about that, and I'll say this last piece, as I'm thinking about experiences that I've had, I remember distinctly a conversation where I brought it up, several issues that were coming up. And the response was very much like, well, can't we just move on from that? Can't you just kind of get over it? Aren't you holding on to it? I've heard that one too. Right? And the thing about it is I'm not holding on to really anything. You all are holding on to being oppressive. And so the question is, like, what are you going to do about it?
You better repeat that. Repeat that.
Yes. You all are holding on to your oppressive ways of being. And that's the reality, right? You're not going to gaslight me. We're not going to pretend like I'm the problem and I'm creating all of these things, right? No, I'm just the one who's like tired and am willing to put myself on the line and take a risk, because it is a risk. Right. And it is a risk that not everyone has, right? And has the privilege to be able to take, right? But I'm willing to take the risk to say something about it. And so I think that there's so much that can be said about that, but I'll stop there because there's just so much to unpack.
Hold on, you're not going to stop because I got a question.
Okay, ask away.
You're not going to stop because I want to elaborate on a couple of things, and we're going to get to Jessica. A couple of things I wrote down that you said was, first naming the trauma, paying attention to how your body responds to the trauma, the emotional numbing, and taking that risk to speak up, because it is a privilege for certain people to do so. We have to make sure we put that out there. I want you to elaborate on a couple of those. What do you mean by it's a privilege?
Absolutely. So the reality is, right, when you speak up, right, you're seen as a troublemaker. You create problems. And so the thing about it is first of all, you risk losing your employment entirely, right? Because now you are a target, right? And so everything that you do or say is going to be scrutinized, is going to, right, show up in some performance evaluation in some way, shape, or form. And it's something that you constantly have to think about, like, am I still going to have employment here, right? I mean, that's a real thing. And then also, this interesting thing that companies talk about when you talk about fit, right? It's kind of like, well, you know what? You are having such a hard time here because you're actually just not a good fit, right?
You're not a team player.
Yeah, right, Zoe. Yeah.
I had that one too. And also, I mean, here's this other thing too, right? Because particularly when you're experiencing trauma, you find yourself trying to really find community, right? And if it's in the workplace, you're trying to find that community in the workplace. And so even talking about the collective trauma that you're experiencing in the workplace, right? As people with marginalized identities, right? And so that is seen as a threat, right? You're not a team player, right? You're gossiping, you're doing, right? And instead of like naming the thing for what it is, right? Like, this place is traumatizing, right? And so, I think it's important to kind of name that, yeah, like, I very well could lose my job. I very well am at risk of never being promoted, right? And so these are all things to kind of think about when we think about risk. Some people do not have that ability to take that kind of risk, right?
Right.
And so, for a lot of people, benefits are attached to this employment, and they very much need those benefits. And I know we're going to get into that too, but
yes,
because that's also a tool to kind of silence as well.
Yes.
And so, this is the reality, right? Not everyone has the privilege to do that. And here's the thing: did I have the privilege in that moment? Not really, but I also knew that it was slowly breaking me down.
Yes,
right?
and we're going to talk about that.
Deteriorating.
Yes,
and I had to say something, and that's just the way it had to be.
Exactly. And I want to pull in the community here because a couple of our community members, Jessica and Maya, specifically Jessica, said, "How dare you stand up for yourself?" I mean, that's what you're telling yourself, right? Because that's what someone else is projecting on you. That was one, which I thought was powerful. So thank you, Jessica. But Maya said, fear can be crippling. And Jessica, you have a really good, let me rephrase that. You have an experience that may have crippled you due to fear. So please share.
Yeah, so my experience, first, everything that Zoe and Francesca have said already, I couldn't say it any better or even add anything to it. So I'll just share, from a personal experience of being in a situation very similar to what Francesca was describing. We have this soundbite, about how silence is complicity. And I think, that's a good thing to have in mind. But I also think we need to think about when it comes to who has power and privilege to speak and who doesn't, because sometimes silence isn't complicity. Sometimes silence is survival, particularly when you are an only, right? Particularly when there is no one like you in your peer group. There is no one from your background who looks or lives or leads or loves like you do. And you raising your voice or you speaking up about your experience and standing for, the experience that you're having puts your very security at risk. And so, I think what happens oftentimes in corporate spaces, particularly as we move up in our careers, the higher we go, the harder it gets. The more and more isolated we become. And we're taught that we're to fight for this seat at the table. And that when we get our seat, victory is mine, right? Like, I've achieved the thing, I can check the box. But my experience was that getting that seat doesn't necessarily protect you from anything, because often that seat is conditional. That seat is contingent upon the ability to assimilate and ensure the comfort of those around you. And I think it was Francesca who spoke about the toll that it takes on the body and the signs that start showing up in the body. And that was my experience. I was in, on paper in a really fantastic place in my career. I had, like many people, back-to-back meetings all day long, calendar booked 6 weeks straight, 17 projects I'm working on. And I ran to a doctor's appointment over lunch to get some lab results, had exactly 60 minutes to get back to the office. I'm in the office waiting for the doctor to come in. I'm checking my phone, I'm responding to texts, I'm looking at messages coming in, and my doctor comes in, places her hand on top of mine, puts my phone in my lap, and says, "I'm putting you out on emergency medical leave starting today. I don't want you to go back to your office. You need to take some time and care for yourself. And you haven't been listening to me the last couple of years. You are now at a place where your body is telling you you cannot continue to put yourself in this environment any longer. And I want you to think about why you continue to put your health at risk for this work environment. Like, what is it that has you continuing to do that?" And so, like, the implications, not only for our mental health and our emotional well-being, but our very physical health and our body's ability to continue to allow us to do our work, is literally at stake when we're in these environments at times and experiencing what is very truly the definition of trauma, and it shows up in our bodies.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. Look, we're getting a lot of love, y'all. Molly said, "Thank you for, spending some time on this topic and for your emotional labor that you're donating right now." I love how she termed that. So thank you so much, Molly. What really resonated with me, Jessica, when you were just speaking on how much we minimize our self-worth, specific, just to keep this title or this salary or these benefits that you all had talked about. So how do you recover when multiple traumas have left you truly doubting your self-worth?
I think it comes from, somebody said the word earlier, it might have even been you, Hakimia, it's finding freedom.
Yes.
And for
Yes,
me,
ma'am.
I found that journey, it happened, and it's only in hindsight that I can see it, right? I'm 7 years past this now, so I can speak about it in a different way. I have a different perspective on it, but looking back, I can see it was finding freedom within myself first. The freedom to stop gaslighting myself, stop discounting my own experiences, and acknowledge what I was actually going through, just to tell myself the truth, to name it so that I could get free from it. That's step one.
Repeat
right?
Repeat that last part. Telling yourself the what?
Telling myself the truth, we self-gaslight. We discount our own experiences and we say, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that bad. I'm doing fine. There's nothing wrong. I'm good. We nod our heads and do this and say we're good, knowing there is turmoil raging inside. It is a hot mess in there, and we're saying that it's fine. We're lying to ourselves, right? So first and foremost, we've got to get that freedom within ourselves to tell ourselves the truth. The second thing we have to do, we got to get free within. The second thing we have to do is get free without. We have to get free without dominant culture's thoughts influencing our definition of success, what we believe about ourselves, how we define our success. There's a Krishnamurti quote that I love where he says, "You think you are thinking your thoughts. You are not. You are thinking the culture's thoughts."
Repeat, Jessica, you are just dropping. I need you to say that again because they want to hear it. I know they do. I'm looking. Okay,
the Krishnamurti quote. You think you are thinking your thoughts. You are not. You are thinking the culture's thoughts. And so when we're talking about dominant culture and you've been marinating in that for an entire lifetime or an entire career, that is embedded in you. And we have to start to disentangle ourselves, like literally unfurl the roots from our guts so that we know what is actually true for ourselves. Step number 3 is freedom of direction in your path and your destination, like you having the power to choose the path that's right for you. And that leads to freedom of expression. And I don't mean saying whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. I mean the freedom to express your true capacity and capability and all that you are able to bring to this world from a place of legacy. So that's my
Yes.
that's my 2 cents. Freedom within, freedom without, freedom of direction.
That's more than 2 cents. You just gave us some 100s over here, right, girlfriend? Come on.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, preach. Like, it's great. And I think the part that also, like, I keep coming back to listening to this conversation as well, is just like this idea of like, we're trying to decide like this battle of like, what is our truth versus what these cultures of power are telling us our truth should be, and then trying to assess the risk of speaking truth to that power, whether it's being vulnerable in work and saying, wait a second, I'm having this experience, and like assessing like, what am I going to lose my job for this? Am I going to lose further lose my psychological well-being by speaking truth to this power? Because maybe I come from a background where I already have these traumas outside of work that resulted in my experience being dismissed, or experiencing gaslighting, or me telling, people in my life, hey, this was harmful. This had a negative impact on me. I don't feel safe. And for that to be squished, to hear those same messages again of, you don't fit in, just buck up and deal with it. Why can't you get over it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And kind of like continuing this idea of like, how do we tell truth to those powers? And going back, Jessica, to what you're saying about like, listening to your own thoughts and how much power do those thoughts have in you, and being able to really pull those apart. I loved that you kind of really spoke to that, of really differentiating between, okay, what is just being pushed onto me, and what is actually what I believe, and how can I actually start treating and loving and being kind and healing myself, and kind of holding those parts of me that have been really shattered in a lot of ways by these powers externally, and how can I help kind of like create this safe container so that I feel comfortable and confident coming into my own power. And I feel like that's really powerful.
Yeah, like I hear in what you're saying, this idea, or maybe it's just my interpretation of it, or, my own experience, but is this idea of like, how do I create my own psychological safety? How do I create my own little bubble where I'm not waiting for someone to give it to me or to create it around me, but where I carry that within me wherever I go, such that I'm not disrupted by the environment that I'm experiencing. That doesn't make it okay. I'm not giving a pass at all, but I'm saying like, how do I create this self-contained psychological safety such that I can separate the messages I'm getting in my environment from my own truth?
Right, exactly. I love how you said that.
Oh no, Hakimi, we're losing you.
Yeah.
She'll come back.
Hello?
It's all right. Yeah, we got you.
There we go.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Francesca, I know you had some things to say around, not looking to the organization to provide everything, and you probably have a lot more to say about, what the condonement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I actually recently said this to a close friend of mine, maybe about a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about workplace trauma, and she was telling me about her experiences, and I said, listen, okay, she's a Black woman. I said, listen, sis, you're gonna have to draft and sign your own freedom papers. Okay, this company is not going to save you. I understand that what the benefits look like, and I get all of that, but they're killing you slowly. And so, and these are the kind of conversations we have to have, like really real conversations. I mean, even when we think about why it is that people stay in traumatic situations, right? I know for me, one of the things that I had on a loop in my head, and, being a child of immigrants, being first generation born in this country, I know something that I kept telling myself is, you don't get to complain. How dare you complain? Okay. So many people did so much for you to get here. How dare you complain? You be quiet, you be grateful, and you keep moving. And that is the loop that I had in my head for a very long time, right? And so I think for me, like what kind of shifted me, the experience that shifted me is I actually, it was getting to the point where other people saw that I was deteriorating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a really good friend of mine say to me, I think I think you could use some coaching. There's a really great program. I'd like for you to give it a try. And one of the fundamental questions that they asked me in this program, they said, who are you? And I gave them a whole list of my trauma, all the ways that I was traumatized. And they just kept asking me. And what they helped me to understand is that I had really consented to this narrative that who I am is nothing more than the conglomerate of my traumas. And that was my entire identity. And I could not let go of that because I built my entire identity on this foundation. And so the question then becomes, when someone asks you who you are, right? If you ask yourself, who are you, right? If you are starting with naming your title for a company, we already got some work to do there because you don't own that title. You own you. Right? Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about creating and generating your own psychological safety, your own power, you know that you're generative, right? That's why the company is doing everything that they can, right? To keep you generating for them. You know that you're generating. And so how about you step into your own power and you generate for yourself? How about you start to name yourself and decide who you are outside of all of these experiences that you've had? And I think that is the power. And sometimes you need some support in that. I needed that support. I wasn't able to do it on my own, and I needed someone to coach me to my own greatness, right? But I think that's absolutely, it's key to understand and to think, like, am I consenting to this narrative, right? Am I consenting to this trauma narrative, and am I holding on to it for dear life, right? Even though it's killing me. I mean, that is the question that you get to ask yourself. And then you get to say, what am I going to do about it? Once you've answered that question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I see Jessica and Zoe. Someone, Zoe, what is that?
No, your audio is kind of in and out again, but I do have something to kind of add to that. I feel like, a lot of that is we're talking about shame, right? Like whether it's part of that like shame and fear of, okay, I've identified so closely with these traumatic experiences to the point that it's become a core part of who I am as a person and who I feel I am as a person. How is that kind of perpetuating this fear and these same messages of this, you aren't good enough, of like all these people kind of, you try to speak truth to power and they tell you that you need to be stronger, you're too emotional, you're not a team player, you're too whiny, or like whatever the messages are that you're receiving by speaking about your experience and your truth. And that shame ends up becoming a core part of on replay in our own minds, and becomes really becoming integrated with our own sense of self and identity. And I feel like I had a very similar experience, Francesca, of like feeling so deeply connected to my trauma that it led me to my first career of becoming a trauma therapist, because I didn't have any idea of figuring out who I was or who I could be outside of trauma. And while I worked through my trauma and I felt like I was really making movement and healing from that trauma, it still was just like, it felt so connected to who I was as a person. And it was such a huge switching point for me to even leave that career and go into product management, and now being able to still talk about trauma, but without having this traumatic, like this perpetual kind of replaying, and being able to be like, okay, I'm actually not just someone who has been traumatized. I am also a powerful person. I'm no longer going to be fearful of my own power. I'm no longer going to believe these messages that people have been telling me my own life. And I am going to live into my own potential. I'm going to live into my own strength. I'm going to live into and fight for a world where I'm thriving instead of one where I'm merely surviving. And how am I going to continue to grow and push myself and be true to who I am, and let that shame be quieted down? and really have that fire within me and that power, instead of just let shame just kind of consume every bit of me. And I feel like that's just like such a core switch of some point in your healing journey that you're able to identify, oh, shame is controlling so much of my life. How can I flip that on its head and use that as a way to find my own power and to be able to like be who I am and not be afraid of who I am, and not be afraid of the potential of not just being someone who has experienced trauma, but someone who has goodness to share with the world and who can bring about healing and all of these other important aspects. And to realize that like my voice matters. My voice isn't just a tool for others to oppress me. My voice is a tool to bring freedom to others. And I feel like that is like such a huge impactful part of so many people I've talked to who have been trying to go on this healing journey from trauma.
Well said. And Shonda said, not being afraid to own my own power. I love that. And I know, Francesca, you talked a lot about not being afraid of that own power, or owning your own power.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? You know, when you really start to get clear about how powerful you are, it's terrifying. It actually is terrifying. I'm not gonna lie. Like, sometimes I'm looking around like, ma'am, you are a force to be reckoned with in the best possible of ways. In the best possible of ways, and I'm clear on that, right? And because I am clear on that now, and it took a lot of work, it took a lot of therapy. Shout out to all the Black women therapists out there who got me together and continue to get me together. Okay, because I don't miss those sessions. But you know, I think it's so. Once you know, and if you like really kind of reorient yourself around that fear, it's like, what are you actually afraid of? You know, I know, you know, I see my own clients in therapy, and when I ask them that, right, and really the fear is that their vision is too big for them, or rather, they are not enough to fill that vision that they have for themselves. And you know, that is such a fundamental piece there. It's like people are out here really feeling like they're not enough. And I think the important thing to name too, because one word that gets tossed around a lot is this idea of imposter syndrome, right? This idea of you feeling like you are not competent, you are not capable, you are not worthy, right? And really, we talked about this too, you know, on our own, just kind of switching that around and being very clear. I mean, Jessica, you mentioned that the thoughts that you're thinking are the thoughts of the culture. Those thoughts that you are not enough, you've got to get clear. That's not you. It might sound like your voice, but that is not you. Okay? You are in a culture and in a context that is telling you daily in a variety of creative ways, okay? Because we find creative ways to oppress people. All right?
Very creative.
So creative, I must say. Could we be this creative with our own liberation? Could we please, right? I mean, so creative, right? But you know, and it's really the system that is oppressive and having you believe that you aren't enough for you to even sit here. Now we're calling it imposter syndrome, but this is institutional structural oppression, period. Okay? And that's really what that is. And once you get clear that it sounds like you, but that is not your thought, that is not your voice, it really just opens things up to a whole new world of possibility. And to the point where it's like, my vision is so expansive that I'm just like, do I even have enough time on this earth to do it all? Like, that is the kind of power that, you know, I want people to be stepping into. And in order to do that, you've got to get clear that the fear, it's like you being clear that, oh, I'm powerful and my fear has and my power has an impact. And so that's really what that fear is. Once you get clear about what that fear is, let it work for you. Let's start thinking about ways that of being that actually serve us, you know, because that fear is getting in your way, and they want you to be fearful of your own power. They want to keep you right where they want to keep you. Absolutely not. We are getting creative with our liberation. We're not doing this anymore. No,
Right, right. So then,
not doing this.
yes. So, go ahead, Zoe. And then
And
I'll
we're
ask the
not
next
waiting
question.
anymore. I think that's the other piece that I hear a lot, especially for these larger social movements where we're waiting for these different marginalized communities to find their liberation, is the greater, culture is like, it's not your turn yet. We aren't ready. We aren't ready for a Black president. We aren't ready for a woman president. We aren't ready for all, X, Y, Z, whether it's, queer issues or race issues or all these other things of disability justice, things like that. It's like the greater culture is like, we're not ready, wait your turn. It's like, no. We're ready, and we're ready now. We're going to make it happen. And like, how do you like lean into that power and to find those advocates and find those allies and find those like people that are going to make space for that? And like, there's been plenty of things this world said they weren't ready for, and then somebody was just like, I don't care, I'm ready, so we're going to do it. And it worked out, we're fine. So I think that's like the other thing for me is like, that's another one of those messages that I hear of, where you're fine, just like be quiet and go sit in the corner. And it's like trying to tell us that fear that we feel is valid when really that's just more shame being put on you, and that's just more oppression. And so how do you live out of that and live into your community, into liberation, into your power, into your truth?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Sorry about that, y'all. Poor internet connection. So how do we get ready and get creative and prioritize our talents, emotional well-being?
Well, I can say that for me, once I was kind of like, oh, okay, like this right here is not going to work for me. I kind of said to myself, okay, great. So I'm getting out of here, right? It's time for me to go, and to go where I'm going to be celebrated, where I'm going to be, like feel fulfilled. But I think the other important piece too is I'm going to go where I'm going to be invested in the ways that I want, in the ways that I choose, right? And so, this idea of like, expecting, and you talked about this, Hakima, like expecting a company, right, to be everything to you, right? And one of the things that I said is that company is very clear about their bottom line, and you are not it. You are not that company's bottom line, okay? And so once you get clear about that, like, how are you gonna then become your own bottom line? And so sometimes that means like you saying to yourself, you know what? I'm gonna like take what I can get like from these different spaces, and then I'm gonna decide like, this is what I'm gonna create for myself, And so I think like being willing to step into the possibility. I mean, possibility is so much more expansive, right? I mean, for some people, there's that fear of, well, this is the devil I know. And we use that terminology, right? This is the devil I know. And it's like, okay, but that this is the devil, right? I mean, there is so much possibility out here. And so, once you kind of say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to lean into that because I know that this right here isn't working, you really start to operate in various different spaces in different ways, And so for me, that's the key piece of it. In any space that I go into, I'm very clear about what I'm asking for, not what I'm requesting, what I'm demanding, And if that doesn't work for you, then this doesn't work for me, And it takes a while to get there, but I think for me, that's a key piece of it. And I also, one of the things that I also wanted to mention is, and Jessica, you actually talked about this idea of what it looks like to create like healing workplaces, and the thing about it is, we absolutely should be on that journey. And also I'm clear that workplace is not my healer. And so like actually going to find places where that space is going to be held for you, where you are going to be cared for, and you're going to be able to work through and really invest in yourself. I mean, I think that's absolutely key. And so, two things I don't leave home without: my therapy and my coaching. I just don't. I just don't, because that's what's going to keep me going. That's my fuel. That's my sustenance, right? And whatever I choose to contribute to these other spaces, it's my choice.
Yes.
And so that's the important piece for me in terms of how I've been, moving through the world. And I still got work to do,
Yes. I love that. That's why I love coaching, shedding light on dark places. And Jessica, elaborate a little bit on, creating those healing spaces in the workplace.
Yeah, I think we chatted about that earlier, and my idea is, not necessarily that, work is the place that we go for therapy, but that there is an opportunity to intentionally start to design healthy, healing, helpful spaces and work experiences to mitigate harm. And what would it look like? What would be possible for people and the company if work was a healing place, meaning a place where people got better, right? A place where people were able to learn and grow and become a bigger, better version of themselves, instead of experiencing trauma. And I think in a lot of ways, trauma is the default, just like given, systems of oppression that are operating historically and present day in our companies, like we have to assume that the default is trauma. And so what would it look like proactively, intentionally, on purpose to create space that not only mitigated the harm, but proactively sought to reverse it, to undo it, and to create something bigger and better? And that's what has me intrigued these days, is like, what does that actually look like? How do we create that? What if we designed on purpose from that place, and built our people, programs, processes, practices around that idea? And what if it was focused on the people who historically have been marginalized and excluded? Like, what if that was the focus? Because we know if we create cultures and values and spaces that work for us, for Black and brown folks, for queer folks, for all the folks who typically aren't thought about, then it's going to work for everybody. So that's like, that's what I'm intrigued and curious about these days.
I see you shaking your head, Zoe. Francesca.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Somebody mentioned it in the chat too, that companies will set up EAPs or ERG programs, but they do those one little steps, which are like great steps. Not here to knock on ERGs or EAP programs or anything else, but like, that's not the end all be all. That's just a box that you check, and then you got to keep doing the work. Like, the work never ends. We are humans who constantly experience things, and we're constantly like, my pain and struggle is going to butt up against Jessica and Francesca's pain and struggle. So as two humans who have experienced trauma separately, how is our trauma going to bump into one another in a workplace? And how do we really intentionally have conversations to be open and honest about that in an appropriate way, so that we can work through and still have an established trust and rapport with one another as colleagues and as coworkers? And so it's like, it's people work. It's not just process work. It's not just changing your logo during Pride Month or anything else. Like, it's this deeper work of really being intentional about, okay, we disagree, we stepped on each other's toes. How do we resolve this conflict and have this interaction? Because if anything of my years of being an advocate and a therapist have taught me, is that conflict is one thing that will, either perceived or real conflict is one thing that will trigger trauma almost more than anything else. So that, though, is where like ripe, true opportunity for healing takes place. So how can we in the workplace have leaders who are really like trained and know how to have conflict well, and how to have those conversations and then move forward from that? And I feel like that's such a huge opportunity, especially at our executive tables. Like, you have executives who are there to make hard decisions. your CEO and your CTO are probably going to disagree at times, but are they modeling how to effectively handle those disagreements and modeling how to respond to their teams whenever their teams express concern or fear or instability? And how are you like, it's those people moments that I feel like have so much potential, and it's layered into the other processes and the other programs and all these other things in place. They're intertwined together. It's not going to be a one-stop shop. You can't Amazon Prime having a healing, culture in your workplace.
I love that. You can't Amazon Prime. That's what I'm talking about. And you talk a lot about that too, Zoe, about just keeping these leaders accountable. What are your thoughts on that, Francesca, Zoe, and Jessica?
Yes, I've got thoughts. Goodness, somebody, I'm all about integrity, people. Come on. Being in integrity, right? Like, do the thing that you say you're going to do, right? And so, for me, Jessica, like to what you were talking about before, like what if we were really like on purpose trying to create these healing spaces, and this idea of, when you really focus on the most marginalized of our communities, everyone gets free. I mean, this is what disability justice activists are talking about when they're talking about the universal design. Like, this is what we are talking about. It does not have to be the case that, let's be proactive. Like, why do I have to come and ask you for things that we know, like, is a need, And so one of the things that comes to mind for me is I've had people, like even my own clients, come to say to me, I have, health insurance, but I can't afford the copays, and that's the reason I don't go to therapy, And so, like, okay, like, what if that is something that, as a company, if we say we are committed to supporting people in their healing, we are just going to have a fund for people. It is there. You're not asking for it. It is there, right? You do whatever you need to do to make sure that you get the healing that you need, right? Even when I think about, Zoe, to your point about what would it look like to have leaders, especially our, top, executive, C-suite leaders, what would it look like for them to have the skills to be healing almost like in the way that they're interacting? I mean, and I know in a previous webinar, I've said this, but even when I interact, right, with my own direct reports, one of the first things that I ask in the onboarding process is, as I'm establishing my rapport, I ask them to tell me about the ways that they've experienced organizational harm in the past. Because one, I want to know what they're coming in with. And also I want to make sure that I'm not reproducing it. I'm not reopening any wounds. And that is how I start the conversation as a people leader, right? And no, I'm not your therapist, but I certainly am. And you are in our care when you are in these, like in our space during this time. Right. And so it is our responsibility to be thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like that is such a key piece too. And the last thing is, and I know that I keep talking about coaching, but I think that's so important. And, do we have like unrestricted funds that employees can say, this is your professional development fund, regardless of what that looks like? You decide what that looks like. If that is you honing this skill because you want to pursue your passion and open up your own business, or if that's you want to get, coaching and you want to be able to use your funds to do that and sort of really tap into figuring out who you are and your own leadership identity outside of what people tell you that needs to look like. I mean, that has such a capacity to be healing. And these are tangible things that companies can do now, like not later, but like now.
Right. And for have those things to be an important part of, like, if you're considering promoting an individual contributor into a people management role, you shouldn't just be looking at their performance as an individual contributor. Like, I get that there's some career fields that's like, okay, well, I've been an individual contributor. I'm a great software developer. So my natural progression is now I'm going to become an engineering manager. That's not always the case. Sometimes they don't have the right components, or they aren't ready to manage people. So these should be things that you're thinking about whenever you're hiring or promoting or anything. Have it part of that, like, management prep, management training that you're doing is, are my managers, do they have the skills and the support they need so that they can ask these questions and provide and build this culture and this like trust and transparency and this safety with their teams? If you don't see those aspects with those people, either create a really good development plan with those potential managers or create a different career path for them so they can still grow, but help them kind of create those things where they don't have as much influence on people's experience within the workplace. Like that should be a key component, in my opinion, of your management development.
I get excited and hopeful about the future, imagining what it would be like if the things that Francesca and Zoe just spoke about were to be. Like if we did that on purpose in our organizations. And I think, I have played in the people and culture space for over 20 years, and I think we're in one of the most pivotal evolutions of what
I agree.
Like workplace experience and workplace well-being and people and culture looks like. It's one of the most exciting times I've seen in the last 2 decades. And like when I start thinking about what would it feel like to go to work, what capacity and potential would be generated, what would be created in a space by the people who are in it if the things Francesca and Zoe talked about were actually brought to life. Like I can't even imagine the things that would be unleashed within the people who work within companies if these were the kinds of spaces they were coming to every day. And well, we have a long way to go. I think this is why I'm so excited about the potential and opportunity right now for companies that are starting to pay attention, that are starting to make that shift, that are starting to get it, because like oh man, there's magic, right? There is magic here that can be generated. There is magic that can be created. And for me, like the most beautiful vision I can imagine is all of the folks who don't typically have a voice, all of the folks who aren't typically heard, who, when they start shutting up and shutting down to stay safe, end up shutting down their creativity, their capability, their ideas, their potential right along with it, that being untapped and what that does for them and for our organizations. Like, I can't imagine that. That's the future I'm signing up for. That's the future I'm working towards.
Kimmy, I think we're losing you. But I think usually this is the point where you ask this for some last. Yeah, I got you. Don't worry.
Francesca's done this before.
Listen, okay, the oppressive structures that be want to make sure that we don't hear Hakimia, but we're not going to allow that, right? So one of the things that I will say that I want people to really leave here with is, if you came to this webinar to really see yourself inside of it, I hope you did. I also want to make sure that you leave here understanding that you are worthy, that you are enough, that you matter. And please don't ever, ever, ever wait for anyone to tell you that. I know it is difficult, but all of those things are inside of you. And I just want for you all to just step into your power and allow us to experience the outcome of that with you. So that's what I want to leave you all with today.
Go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, I love that. My heart is like bursting right now, Francesca. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's like good reminders for all of us, and especially just kind of like keep doing the work. Like it's a long haul. So you've gotta, self-care has become such as buzzword, but like really be checking in with yourself, with your mind, with your heart, and with your body on like, how are you being kind and taking care for yourself during this work, because it gets exhausting. And you can we've talked about it already. It's risky to continue to kind of push this boulder up a mountain, is kind of what it feels like sometimes to me. And so keep checking in, take care of your body, take care of your heart, know that you are doing the work, and continue to take those little steps. And I'm really hopeful too with the HR admins that I talk to on a regular basis as part of my job, who are in the middle of it, in the trenches. So really just want to call out those of y'all that are in the people ops and HR field who are working really hard to create these environments, and up against the wall with a lot of execs that might be kind of having some resistance. So just know that we hear you, you know, we're here for you, and really, really proud of the work that you're doing.
I would say that I can relate to the experience of feeling really isolated and experiencing workplace trauma and thinking there was something wrong with me, and trying to figure out what I needed to do to fix myself so that I could belong. And that feeling of isolation will have you thinking that you're the problem. And what I found was that when I got into community, when I found a coach, when I got into community, and when I started connecting with others who'd had a similar experience, there was so much validation in my point of view and my experience just being seen and heard and allowed to exist. And so there's a quote that inspires me regularly. It's Oprah's adaptation of a Maya Angelou quote, but she says, "I come as one, I stand as 10,000." And so just that reminder that, like, even if you feel like you are an only, you are not alone. You are a part of 10,000. And that community and connection can be so healing and so supportive in the journey.
Thank you all.
Who is open to closing the webinar and say goodbye? I'm sorry we lost you, Kimia.